Hello, this is Matt Carter, and I'll be sharing with you an update regarding our small group ministries. If you are familiar with the book of Daniel, you may remember there were a number of young men who were deported from Judah into Babylon along with Daniel. And there they faced many challenges, among which was the mandate to eat foods that were set before them by the king. That food would have been unlawful for them to have eaten, and they would have dishonored the Lord by eating it. And so, as a result, Daniel requested that they be given only vegetables to eat and water to drink. So it was agreed upon for the next 10 days that they would do that. Listen to what happened as a result of the request. I'm reading here from Daniel chapter 1. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. Well, what's the point? God was pleased to honor Daniel and his friends with knowledge and understanding because of how intent they were to honor the Lord in the midst of such difficult circumstances. Well, what in the world does that passage have to do with our small group ministry? Simply this: as our entire congregation has been exiled not to a foreign land, but to our own homes, our small group leaders have been intently working to figure out how best to minister to those in their small groups in the midst of real crisis. And our Lord has graciously blessed their desire to honor Him in the midst of doing so. Back in March, as businesses were closing, as the church was closing, our new shepherding model, that is, shepherding through small groups and through the various ministries of our church, was really put to the test. A few weeks after the lockdown began, we reached out to small group leaders to encourage them to begin reaching out by phone to folks within their small groups, checking on how people were doing and praying with them. And what was interesting was, by that time, many of our small group leaders had already been in personal contact with the folks in their small groups. And those who hadn't yet been in contact with folks in their small groups were eager to do so. During those early weeks of COVID, our church staff were experimenting with various formats of meeting. At first, we began meeting over Teams, and we researched a number of different platforms and settled on meeting over Zoom, feeling that it was far more intuitive and useful to our group. We did, during those early weeks, hear about some of the security concerns regarding Zoom, and after investigating, decided to employ some safeguards for security. We then held an online Zoom meeting with all of our small group leaders in attendance. Most of them, by that point, had already been meeting with their groups, most of them via Zoom, but a couple of them through other platforms. What was most encouraging during that season was to learn that our small group leaders had been just as active as our church staff had been in terms of discovering and implementing new means of meeting with folks in their groups. Beyond that, our ability to cross-pollinate and help one another as small group leaders was tremendously uplifting. As we rolled toward the first week of May and our annual spring week of prayer, the question was, of course, do we attempt to hold our week of prayer during this lockdown or not? And there were pros and cons in every discussion we had. Finally, we decided to ask our small group leaders to spearhead our effort to hold the week of prayer and to do it through Zoom and other platforms they'd been using. We're so grateful that our small group leaders, not just for their willingness to lead prayer in this fashion, but their skill in doing so and their willingness to welcome people from outside their small groups to those prayer meetings as we prayed. I'd like to mention just 2 elements of our spring week of prayer that I hope will encourage you. The first is this: we actually had an uptick in participation during this spring week of prayer. We saw 197 participants involved in that week of prayer. If we compare that to last fall we saw 168, and a year ago, last spring, we saw 160. So we had a significant uptick in terms of participation. Secondly, we sent out a brief questionnaire on the backside of those Zoom prayer meetings And what we discovered from the data that came back was overall the responses were quite positive. It wasn't that attending a Zoom prayer meeting could possibly replace face-to-face interaction with your brothers and sisters as you prayed, but in the main, our people, by God's grace, made the best of a difficult situation. And for that, we say thank you to all of you, and a special thanks to our small group leaders who led the charge in that. Now, I want to shift gears here a little bit and give you a feel for the scope of our small group ministries here at Brick Lane currently. Right now, we have 24 small groups. 16 of them are open groups, meaning that they welcome new people into their groups. 7 of them are closed groups, and one of those groups is made up primarily of non-Brick Lane attenders. And currently we have approximately, this is approximate, we have about 205 people attending small groups. Of the 24 groups that we have, 2 are brand new this year. They're brand new groups that began meeting earlier in the fall. One group that has been a long-standing group has taken a break for a while and is preparing to restart under new leadership. And one group is a group that combined, 2 different groups got together and combined during this past year. The Lord is working through our small group leaders and has continued to favor us throughout this year. Our God is faithful. Shepherding ministries remain strong, and we have real reason to be grateful to our Lord and King. God be praised.